Hello and welcome to the LLG Grapevine podcast. You're listening to Helen McGrath, Head of Public Affairs, and Dennis Hall, LLG Bulletin Editor.
Hello, everyone.
In an explosive week which saw the resignation of Dominic Raab alongside his accusation of very activist civil servants, Dennis and I will stick to the world of local government. What caught your attention this week, Dennis?
Well, Helen, it's the elections up first, and voter ID in particular. The headlines are these. Simply not enough people know about voter ID requirements. Few of those who need to know are aware of what they need to do. And everyone predicts that vulnerable people are likely to miss out on their right to vote. And there's more. When you go to the polling station on the 4th of May, there'll be more than just polling staff there to greet you. Here's more. Polling stations in England will have extra staff to help voters on the 4th of May as the government introduces its new rules on photographic ID, the Electoral Commission has said. The change in voting rules will mean that people turning up at polling stations are required to show photographic identification for the first time. The Commission said there will be more staff. Some polling stations, particularly larger ones, where there are more people who will be registered in that area, will have greeters attending upon them, people who are outside the polling station that can make sure that people are definitely aware of the ID requirement, that they've got it with them, and just to make sure that any queues are being eased through. The Commission say that the new staff are prepared for the variety of individual circumstances and situations that they may experience. So, clearly then, the experience of voting at the ballot box will never be the same ever again. And the introduction of the mandatory photo ID at the polling booth has been severely criticised by MPs and campaigners, and it's hardly surprising. Ministers recently faced renewed accusations that the plan is a waste of time and resources after statistics showed that not a single proven case of voter impersonation was discovered last year. The statistics highlighted a point made repeatedly by opponents of voter ID, namely that it tackles a problem that is almost unknown in Britain, while creating a barrier to voting for the estimated 2 million adults who lack the necessary documentation. Meanwhile, other official data showed minimal take-up of the free official voter documents before the local elections take place in England on the 4th of May. Those without ID can apply for a free voter authority certificate issued by their council, but available only via a central government portal. And so far, exactly 37,000 people have applied for the certificate, and that's fewer than 2% of the possible number of voters currently lacking ID. Both older and younger voters are even less likely to have applied for the document, despite both groups being seen as vulnerable to being put off from voting by the new laws. Voter ID is a solution to a problem that doesn't exist, or certainly not to the extent that it requires this level of attention. It is the proverbial sledgehammer to crack a nut, and a crude one at that. You are simply bound to wonder whether the motive behind these changes is an ulterior one, something other than the reason given for the introduction of these changes. And the price of all of this is disenfranchisement of the young, the poor, the elderly, and the vulnerable. Such collateral damage, seemingly, is considered acceptable. Now, a personal postscript on this. I've worked on all elections of all kinds between 1983 and 2017. I've always held Democratic Services officers and election teams in the highest regard for what can be termed their resilient professionalism. Today, I have the utmost sympathy for what they have to do now. They must be in complete despair over all of this. I cannot recall one instance of personal voting offences ever taking place in any election in 34 years. Helen.
Now, reported in The Guardian, research from the Resolution Foundation has found that 1 in 6 young adults in the UK are living in poor quality housing. The think tank found that up to 2.6 million people aged 18 to 34 were living in poor quality housing, which is defined as homes that were not in a good state of repair, where heating, electrics, or plumbing were not in full working order, or where damp was present. This comes at a time when the Times reported that more than 310,000 children in England share a bed with parents or siblings because of overcrowded homes. This derives from a report published by the National Housing Federation, which found that almost 2 million children, 1 in 6, live in overcrowded homes due to shortages in affordable housing. The findings also demonstrated grave structural inequalities in our society, with households from ethnic minority backgrounds 3 times more likely to be affected by overcrowding than white households. The Federation states that the leading cause of overcrowding in England is a chronic shortage of social housing, arguing that families already living in social housing are the most likely to be overcrowded, as there are no larger social homes available for them to move to, and they cannot afford any other type of home. This group accounts for around half of all overcrowded families. Then the Federation points to families on low incomes who cannot access a social home and are forced to rent privately, where rents can be more than double that of social housing, meaning many cannot afford a suitably sized home. A third of overcrowded families live in private rented homes. Finally, the Federation points out that in 2010, the government cut funding for affordable housing by 63%, which was the biggest cut to any capital budget at the time. It also cut all funding for new homes at social rents. This, the Federation argue, led to a rapid decline in the number of new social homes being built, thereby intensifying an already existing shortage. Whilst in recent years the government has allowed grant funding to be used to build homes for social rent, funding remains at historically low levels. Last year, only 6,554 social rent homes were built, 81% fewer than in 2010. Now, Dennis, Lord Evans is urging greater proactive attention, I believe. Tell us more.
Indeed, he has. Committee on Standards Chairman Lord Evans published a blog the other week emphasising his commitment to the view that there is a need for greater proactive attention to standards to protect the integrity of government. Now, this is a timely blog in many respects this week, is it not? All the evidence points in this direction, he says, and he sees hopeful signs that a number of welcome steps are already being taken by government. In November 2021, the committee published the report on its landscape review of the standards regime in central government. Upholding public standards made recommendations to increase the independence of regulators, strengthen the rules, and build a better compliance culture in central government. Like the previous Boardman report into Greensill and the report of the Public Administration and Constitutional Affairs Committee, published in December 2022, the evidence that the committee heard pointed to the need for greater proactive attention to standards to protect the integrity of government. Lord Evans says that changes to the structures and processes that support high standards often, and inevitably, follow a scandal and its immediate response. But when changes are made following media and public outcry, this runs the risk of rushed, disproportionate, or partial reforms. Lord Evans reminds us that the committee's 2021 report was not a response to any particular scandal, but was intended as a health check on the complex web of regulatory bodies, rules, and codes that have evolved over several decades. They looked at the ethical regulation of public appointments made by ministers, how conflicts are managed in business appointments when people leave public office, the ministerial code governing ministerial conduct, and the level of transparency around lobbying and ministers' interests. The current system has, according to Lord Evans, been stress tested in recent years, and he says that recent polling shows the worrying impact that negative perceptions of standards can have on public trust. The government has committed to responding to the committee's report before the summer, and Lord Evans remains hopeful that the 2021 proposals are being carefully considered by government. The appointment of Sir Laurie Magnus last December and the publication of his reports on individual cases are, he says, welcome steps. And Lord Evans might also be tempted to reflect that the outcome of the Tolley report into the conduct of Dominic Raab was also a step in the right direction.
You couldn't resist a mention, Dennis, could you? But there are parallels and an important reminder for local government. In other news, the Professional Association for Social Workers and Social Work, BASW, have spoken out against the government's decision to delay the introduction of liberty protection safeguards, stating they are disappointed. In a letter addressed to stakeholders, the UK government confirmed that it would be delaying the implementation of the LPS beyond the life of this Parliament in the wake of the release of its plans for adult social care, next steps to put people at the heart of care, on the 4th of April. Now, in their press statement, the BASW said that it's not currently clear what this means for the publication of the revised Mental Capacity Act Code of Practice, which integrated chapters on the new LPS. The draft code was consulted upon last year. BASW is calling upon the government to publish the revised Mental Capacity Act Code of Practice at the earliest opportunity to ensure good practice across health and social care and reaffirm the Department of Health and Social Care's commitment to this area of practice. This commitment will be in question following the announcement on liberty protection safeguards. And it's also important that the Department for Education be engaged in launching the revised code to reinforce its importance as it relates to 16 and 17-year-olds. The BASW also makes reference to the impact of DOLs, which the implementation of liberty protection safeguards were meant to address. The next UK general election must be held by January 2025 at the latest, but it's still a long time for wait for those counting on the safeguards to reform this area of law. Dennis.
Well, I want to raise the question of standards and ethics now. Not members, but officers. Are you sufficiently independent and professionally curious to offer the correct advice at all times, particularly on regulatory and compliance issues? Are you able to say no when no is the correct answer to give? And how do you know that the environment in which your team operates is conducive to a proper approach on these matters? Here's a story from our in-house counterparts. An in-house solicitor had to quit their job after raising concerns that their organisation was breaching their legal duties. Major new research published by the Solicitors Regulation Authority has recently revealed. The regulator surveyed more than 1,200 in-house solicitors to understand the main issues affecting the growing sector. The review found that overall, in-house solicitors were in a good position to withstand pressures that could affect their ability to provide objective and impartial advice. However, 5% of respondents had been pressured into suppressing information that conflicted with their regulatory obligations, and 10% felt their regulatory obligations were compromised trying to meet their organisation priorities. One solicitor told the survey that they frequently had to educate or remind colleagues about their regulatory obligations and that regulatory compliance is standard business practice, which doesn't make us uncommercial. Another respondent said, the organisation I worked for was engaged in practices that I considered were likely to result in breaches of their legal duties. They required me as a solicitor to report as an officer of the court. I raised concerns with the senior leadership and as a result had to leave the organisation. Nearly all respondents said that they felt comfortable saying no if asked to advise on an unethical course of action. However, several respondents who felt their legal function was not valued frequently mentioned that their advice was ignored, misunderstood, or challenged. Legal advice is often challenged at all levels without understanding of the law or basis upon which advice is given. This is largely because they have already committed to a course of action and want legal advice to rubber stamp an approach, one respondent said. Only a fifth of in-house teams had dedicated policies or procedures for ethical responsibilities. Commenting upon these findings, SRA Chief Paul Phillip said that the regulator will be doing a range of work to support in-house solicitors to ensure that they and their employers understand their professional obligations. Now back to our sector and some practicalities. Does your department or team have a pathway for dealing with situations where advisors are faced with officers who ignore legal advice? Are you simply expected merely to rubber stamp actions that have previously been decided upon by your council? And yes, ethical considerations may be a recognised corporate consideration in your council, but what is the working reality on a day-to-day basis? What precisely would nurture a positive culture of professional curiosity in your council?
Now, to finish, the Equalities and Human Rights Commission has updated its technical guidance on the public sector equality duty by setting a new expectation that public services must treat everyone with dignity and respect. The Commission states that it's committed to its vision of a modern Britain where everyone is treated with dignity and respect and everybody has an equal chance to succeed. When discussing the equality objective, for example, the guidance states that it should state clearly for both the listed authority and its stakeholders the outcome the authority seeks to achieve. This outcome should relate to one or more of the aims of the general equality duty. Objectives to improve community relations or to have a more diverse workforce are far too generic. They are not specific, and so would mean that a listed authority was failing to comply with its specific duties. An example of a more specific equality objective, for example, is for a hospital to increase from its current baseline for the proportion of over 55s reported as being treated with dignity and respect by 35% over a 4-year period, which makes sense to me. The Commission also defined harassment as including unwanted behaviour that has the purpose or effect of violating a person's dignity. Now, just before we go, I do want to mention that the LLG Awards nomination deadline has been extended for an additional week due to demand. The deadline is now the 1st of May. There are 6 categories and plenty of scope for authorities to nominate individuals or teams, or indeed, we would love to see multiple nominations from authorities. Make the time, brighten morale, because we increasingly need to really champion our sector. Unrelated, but nevertheless impressive, congratulations to our president, Rachel McCoy, who successfully completed the London Marathon. And well done too to all those taking part and raising so much for so many wonderful charities. And on that note, you can read more on the items discussed today and many more besides by going to bulletin number 15, available on the LLG website now. So it's goodbye from me.
And from me too.
Have a good week, everyone.